Welcome to our last Science on Tap of the season. This, as always, is brought to you by the Trinity River Restoration Program and the Trinity County Resource Conservation District. So let's give the RCD a hand for helping pull this together. Without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker. So we are excited to welcome Eli Asarian. Eli is an aquatic ecologist and hydrologist with roots in the area, used to live in Weaverville. He's the founder of consulting firm Riverbend Sciences out of Eureka. Does work all over, but he's had a disproportionate amount of his work in the Klamath-Trinity Basin, so this is very much home for him. He's studied everything from river flow, water quality, salmon, and beavers in California and Oregon rivers for the last 20 years. He's assisted with the development and implementation of salmon recovery plans throughout California, and serves with me on the board of the Salmonid Restoration Federation, where he is currently our president. He has scoured many library archives and the depths of the internet to help reveal what we are about to hear from him tonight, the story of the Northwest California beaver. Please help me in giving a warm welcome to Eli Asarian.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for coming. The title of my talk tonight is Northwest California Beavers in Motion, and past, present, and future. And you'll see I mean the word motion in many senses of the word, as I'll explain during the talk. So we're going to start with a few quick audience polls, and your level of enthusiasm for these polls can vary depending on how you feel. So you could either just raise a pinky finger if the answer is yes, or you can raise your hand, or you can jump up and down, or you can go woo woo, or whatever you want to do. So who here has seen the sign of a beaver, like a chewed stick or a dam or whatnot? Okay, all right. How about a live beaver? Wow, okay. What about a dead beaver? Okay, all right. Who here works in natural resources? All right, a lot of you. And who is interested in local and or California history? Okay, great. Well, you've come to the right place. A little bit about myself. Mike, I think, did a pretty good job of introducing me, so I'll go pretty fast. I guess the main thing I'll say is that as far as beaverology, I'm really a self-appointed amateur. I'm not a wildlife biologist, and my beaver habit is subsidized by my day job as an environmental consultant. So now on to some beaver basics. Sounds like a lot of you already know something about beavers, or a lot about beavers, but it's important to make sure we have some fundamental stuff here. So we're talking about the American beaver. In Latin, that's Castor canadensis. It's different than the Eurasian beaver. They have a separate species over there in Europe and Asia. And it's also different than the mountain beaver. That's Aplodontia, and it's a very terrestrial species and not an American beaver. Does anyone in the audience speak Hoopa, Karuk, or Yurok, or know how to pronounce the word beaver in those languages? Wanted to give a chance because I'm not very good at this. Just kind of look this up on the internet. So the word in Hoopa is something like schwa, in Karuk, sapanich, and in Yurok, tasir. Beavers are semi-aquatic rodents. They are the third largest rodent in the world and the largest rodent in North America. Now, they're not quite as big as the rodents of unusual size from The Princess Bride, but they're still pretty big, pretty impressive sized critters. And they're vegetarians, so you don't need to worry that they're going to attack you and eat you. They eat mostly aquatic plants, and then things in the trees and shrubs in the willow family. So willows, cottonwoods, and aspens. And aspens is what they really like. If they have a choice, they're going for the aspen. Some people call that the beaver chocolate. And they will also eat alder, but it's not preferred, but they can survive on it. Yeah. What's that? Maple. Okay. Yeah. Let's see what else. So they eat the tender leaves and stems and the inner bark of these plants. As far as social structure, they generally form pair bonds for life. where there's a male and a female, and they'll have one set of kits. That's what the baby beavers are called, is kits. And they, the kits will stay with the parents for about 2 years. So at any given time in a lodge or a den, you could have multiple year classes of kits. And then after about 2 years, then the kits disperse off to find their own territories. They're very highly territorial. Beavers are known as an ecosystem engineer and a keystone species, so they really have powerful effects on the environment. And of course, the most famous of these is dam building. Sometimes it's just one dam, like in the upper left there. That's Hole in the Ground Creek on the Shasta, in the Shasta Valley. And there is just a single dam with a little trickle coming out of a spring, and they've transformed that into this nice pond that's great habitat for fish and wildlife. Or if the beavers are in an area over time and they can really build and expand, they can build what's called a dam complex, which is a series of dams, and they can just take a whole valley and turn it into these giant beaver swamps. So there can be multiple dams, canals, all sorts of stuff going on in there, with lots of different nooks and crannies for lots of different kinds of critters to hide, and places where there's hot water and cold water, and there's lots of different organisms that can find their little piece of these complexes that they like. But dams are not the only thing that they do. They also build canals. So they'll dig canals, and they do that to access food sources. Because the beaver, I don't know, has anyone ever seen a beaver walk on land before? They're pretty clumsy, right? They want to stay in the water because they're really strong, powerful swimmers. And so they build the canals to get out to their food sources. They will also, of course, eat the trees and bushes, and so they can change the growth form of those. And something like a willow, if it gets chewed off by a beaver, it's going to vigorously resprout, and it's called coppicing, and they form these lots of different stems. So it can change sort of the way that the vegetation grows. They also will form these big piles of sticks, and sometimes it's like could be a food cache where they're storing the food for later, or they could be things they've already eaten, sticks with all the bark stripped off. And these actually are really important for the river habitat. They provide a lot of complexity. As anyone know, Marissa Parrish, she did her master's thesis on the Smith River, looking at the effect of beavers on coho salmon habitat on the main stem of the Smith River. And she found that even though the Smith River is big, and the beavers don't need to build dams because the water is already deep enough that they don't need. You saying louder or talk louder? Oh, okay, good, okay. They don't build dams there because they're already protected from the predators because it's deep enough. But what they do is they have these jumbles of sticks at the entrances to the bank lodges, and what that does is it just creates a lot of physical structure where the juvenile salmon and other animals can hide in those big piles of sticks. And those have been referred to as river reefs, like the coral reefs of the ocean. These are called river reefs. So we'll move on to some history now. So I've arbitrarily divided the history of beavers up into 5 different eras. We have the pre-contact era, the fur rush, the low point in beaver populations, state-sponsored reintroductions, and my favorite, the beaver superstar era. So in the pre-contact area, when indigenous people were in full control of land and water management in California, a lot of our valley bottoms looked like this here. The beaver complexes, like I showed in the previous slide, was this really complex habitat. The valleys are really wet and swampy, and there's willows and beaver dams all over the place, right? And I don't know too much about what Native people use beaver for, but one thing I know is that some of the local tribes in the Klamath Basin use the beaver pelts to build quivers to store their arrows in. So with a group of about 6 other people, and I was just one member of this team. I was not the leader of this team, but I'm the one speaking to you today. We set off on a historical research project to try to figure out where beavers were native within the state of California prior to all the trapping. And we really went very, very deep into the history, much deeper than anyone had gone before. And I'm not going to talk too much about our methods and all that. You can ask questions if you want to. But this is our historical beaver distribution map in the red outline there that we came up with, which is essentially the entire state except for the deserts in southeastern California, because there's no perennial water there. So beaver really cannot survive without perennial water. But essentially the whole state, we think, was historic beaver range. And this is in contrast to the conventional scientific wisdom in the state for the past 50 to 100 years, where people used to think that beavers were only native to 3 areas of the state: the Colorado River, the Central Valley and the Delta, and then the far north part of the state, the Klamath, Trinity, Smith, Pitt River, McCloud, Upper Sacramento. But that really was just sort of an artifact of the time at which this early research was conducted. Of course, it was after all of this really intensive trapping had happened. And so they just kind of looked around at where beavers were on the landscape, and they just didn't dive as deep into the history and look at as many sources as we did. And that fact of people thinking that beavers were not native to the coast, most of the coast of California, was really an impediment to beaver restoration and fisheries and salmon restoration in California. And so that was really the impetus for this historical research project, was to try to disprove what we thought was not correct. And so I think at this point we've pretty much almost convinced everyone that beavers are native to almost all of the state of California. The physicist Max Planck had this very well-known saying. This is not exactly what he wrote, but it's how people remember it. And that is that science advances one funeral at a time. Meaning that scientists and people in general really don't really change their minds. They just eventually die, and then they're replaced by the next generation who learns what they learn in school and makes their own discovery. And that's how science progresses over time. But since we're talking about state wildlife management, we could say that science advances one retirement at a time. And we could also say that beaver management advances one grassroots movement at a time. Because this evolution in understanding beaver science and societal attitudes about beaver, it wasn't like there was a high up person at the top of the ivory tower or the top of the government that just sort of decreed something and it was so, right? It was hard work by people like me and you and your friends and the efforts of many people over time that caused this societal evolution. So we're going to really dive into some of the history now. Pretty much all this history stuff that I'm going to talk to you about comes from 3 documents. There's the peer-reviewed history report that I was one of 7 co-authors on. And then there's 2 reports from the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center. Brock Dolman and Kate Lundquist were the main authors on those. Anyone know Brock and Kate? Okay, yeah, a few, yeah. They're really kind of the masterminds behind the California beaver revolution. So the fur rush started from the ocean, from ships sailing along the sea. And it was primarily Americans and Russians. And the Spanish got in there, but they were a little late to the party. What they were really after to start with was sea otters. That was the really valuable fur. And they went through all the sea otters. And then they went through all the seals. And then they looked on the land at the river mouths and they're like, oh, what about the beaver? Can we get the beaver? And they started trapping them. But they pretty much stayed pretty close to the ocean. There's a lot of nice beaver habitat right where the rivers come to the ocean. A lot of flat streams, a lot of good beaver habitat. And then trappers came overland. Probably everyone knows the name Jedediah Smith, right? He was probably the most famous. This photo here is of Stephen Meek. And he was a trapper who went in Scott Valley, over the mountain to the north of here. And in 1850, he claims that in one summer, he and his trapping crew caught 1,800 beaver in Scott Valley.
Caught them or did they kill them?
Killed them. Yeah, caught, trapped. Caught, trapped, killed, turned into hats. Yeah. So that just gives you a sense of the sort of the mind-boggling abundance of beaver in those most favorable flat valley habitats. It's not like the whole state had 1,800 beavers in every beach or stream, but in those really high quality habitats like the Scott Valley and the Central Valley of California and the Applegate Valley in Oregon and the flat valleys. And it really was all about this fashion trend for hats. It was a really big deal, and the beaver pelts were worth a lot of money. I think it was in Europe and in Asia where these were really hot items. And you could only do that level of intensive trapping. They essentially moved across the landscape, killing every single beaver that they could find, and then just move on to a new area. And you can do that maybe once or twice, or maybe somebody can come back 20 years later when the populations have bounced back a little bit, but populations went down pretty fast, and they stayed kind of bouncing along the bottom for quite a while. Until about 1911, and that's the year that California first banned beaver trapping in California. Californians realized that if they wanted to have beavers into the future, that they needed to do something right then, because they were going extinct. They were down to 4 populations. Pretty small populations. The Colorado River, the Central Valley and the Delta, and the lower Klamath River, and the Pitt River up in northeastern California. Really just kind of a handful of beavers. So trapping was banned. And just to give you a sense of what was happening in California at the time, that was the year, 1911 was the year that women won the right to vote in California. That was the year that Ishi wandered out of his wilderness hideaway and gave himself up in Oroville. Copco Dam on the Klamath River was under construction, where it would block salmon passage for 110 plus years until it was removed last year. Yeah. So it was a pretty interesting time, really, in the history of California. And it was probably also the low point for the population of indigenous people in the state of California. So trapping was banned for about 15 years, and ever since then, populations have been generally increasing, although in 1926, they allowed trapping again, and the populations crashed, and they had to put the trapping ban back in. But this was, I think, was around the low point, approximately. And then in 1923, the state embarked on a pretty ambitious reintroduction effort to try to get beavers back across California. And in some places, they even used airplanes to drop beavers with parachutes into places like Lassen National Forest. So here's a map of Northern California with those little dots representing places where beavers were reintroduced by the state. It started in 1923, it ended in 1950, but it really got rolling in the late 40s. Was really when most of it happened. So around here, the first ones were in Scott Valley in 1936 and 1940, followed by near Hayfork in 1948, and then lots of different places around Scott Valley and the mountain lakes and meadows around Scott Valley in 1949. And so those reintroductions, as well as that remnant population in the lower Klamath River that never went extinct, never was extirpated, that formed kind of the seeds from which all of our Northern California beaver populations come from today. And the beaver populations over the next several decades just continued to slowly expand up. They moved a little bit higher up into the mountains, and they maybe moved 1 or 2 drainages over and just kind of did their beavers doing their beaver things and growing and expanding their populations. And I'm going to say that this era ended in about 2006. Obviously, it's pretty arbitrary years, but I'll say that the superstar beaver era started in 2007. And it started in the city of Martinez near San Francisco Bay. And so some beavers happened to come in from the Delta, and they built a dam on Alhambra Creek in downtown Martinez, like right in the downtown area. And they built a pond, and it started attracting ducks and egrets and other wildlife that people weren't used to seeing in their kind of nasty, urban, polluted stream. And it got a lot of attention, a lot of people bird watching and wildlife watching. But the city government was getting pretty nervous because they thought that the beavers might start flooding the roads and the buildings nearby. And so they wanted to hire a trapper and come and kill the beavers and kind of solve the problem, right? But the townspeople, they didn't like that idea, and they kind of rebelled. And they had protests, and they got lots of media attention, and they came up with an alternative plan. And that was to bring in a beaver expert from the East Coast, where they've had more beavers for a long period of time. And he built what's called the flow control device that regulated the level of water in the dam to keep it so it was still a pond, but it wasn't a threat to public safety. And it all worked out really well. And now they actually have an annual beaver festival in Martinez where it brings in tourists, and it's a big cultural and economic event for the town. Has anyone ever been to the Martinez Beaver Festival? Anyone? Well, you have a chance coming up. The 16th annual is on June 28th, if you're not busy. Head south. Then in 2009, Brock Dolman and Kate Lundquist from the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center launched the California Bring Back the Beaver campaign. And Kate and Brock are really sort of the masterminds of the beaver. I think I said that earlier, of the beaver restoration in California. So they convened a group of people. You'll see me in the back row there if you look closely. In 2012, the California Beaver Working Group, where we met at the Ecology Center, and we strategized for what type of beaver research we needed to do and how to move policy forward. And Kate and Brock came up with this plan that was slowly implemented over a 15-year period. There was a conference in Southern Oregon in Canyonville in 2010, the State of the Beaver Conference. And since then, there's been many other beaver conferences. There's the California Beaver Summit and the National Beaver Con. And this State of the Beaver Conference happened every other year. So I didn't make it to the first one, but I did make it in 2011. And so I was learning all this great stuff about how beavers affected the environment and affected fish habitat. And I was thinking to myself, well, that sounds really great. I want to go see some of these places. I've never seen a beaver dam or seen a beaver. Where can I go? And I looked around, was talking to people, and there really was not a great, very accurate map where you could go to and be like, okay, where are the beavers? I want to go there and look at them. There just wasn't one. So I've been talking to my friends and drinking a few beers, and I went back to my hotel room, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to start my own beaver mapping project. And I worked on it for a couple hours, and I got a real ugly draft map with a few dots on it that night, and then we continued to work on it in the coming weeks and months. That project was called the Beaver Mapper, and it was really the first effort in recent decades to map the distribution of beavers in California. And then Google discontinued the technology, and it's defunct, and there's much better things available now like iNaturalist. So I'd encourage you all to put your beaver sightings into iNaturalist, and I'll talk a little more about that later. There's also been a big evolution in the science of understanding how beavers affect rivers and affect the environment and affect fish habitat, things like that. So a lot of our streams have really been channelized, and they've downcut, as you see in the upper left photo there, disconnected from their floodplains. Water velocities are really fast when flows are high. It's not good fish and wildlife habitat. So what the beavers can do is, over time, raise the elevation of the channel bed up closer to the surface, raise the groundwater table, and reestablish that floodplain reconnection. The riparian vegetation, the willows and cottonwoods and things, do much better when the groundwater table is higher. And beavers can really fundamentally transform our streams if we give them the space to work. So there was just paper after paper after paper of new research coming out. There's also another research avenue was Smokey the Beaver. So the idea that we're having more and more intense wildfires, and you can see from this photo that the beaver swamp didn't stop the fire, but it did create a green island in the middle of the fire, or at least that was kind of an oasis where species could survive. There was a lot of beaver books that came out, like They Once Were Hats and Beaverland and Eager. Has anyone read any of these? I haven't read any of them, but they were popular books. In 2022, the CalPBR, that's the California Process-Based Restoration Network, was formed. And this is a group of many different nonprofit organizations, government agencies, private consultants, formed this group to promote beaver-based restoration and other similar habitat restoration techniques. So they have, I'll talk more about them later. Then in 2022, as a result of all this changing societal attitudes about beavers and the lobbying efforts of Brock and Kate and the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center and the lobbyists that they hired in Sacramento, they were able to convince the governor to put into his budget proposal a beaver restoration program. And that included 5 permanent positions to develop and implement the program, which was a beaver management plan and a restoration plan to actually start moving beavers, translocating beavers from places where maybe we have too many beavers that are causing a problem, and then moving them into areas that are not currently occupied by beavers. To do outreach and education, and to establish a program to assist landowners in dealing with potential beaver-related issues. So it really was a big moment, because really the Department of Fish and Wildlife honestly had been one of the major impediments to beaver restoration in California. And with this program, they flipped that and became one of the major proponents. The most emblematic moment of this restoration program was in 2023, when in the Tasman Koyam Meadow up in Plumas County, in the footprint of the Dixie Fire, the Department of Fish and Wildlife reintroduced beavers into that meadow where they'd been gone for many, many years. So it was the first state reintroduction effort in 75 years. Yeah, pretty big deal. The governor was there, the head of Fish and Wildlife was there. It was a really great moment. The Maidu Summit Consortium, who owns that land and is the tribal people in that area, were heavily involved as well. So it was really a good moment. I wasn't there, but I've seen the video and it looked fun. So now we're going to move through some more local examples of what are beavers doing around in our local rivers, with a focus on the Klamath Basin. So we'll start in the lower Klamath and then we'll move to the Scott River. So the Yurok tribe has a very active fisheries program and a habitat restoration program down in the lower Klamath. One place they work is in McGarvey Creek, and the lower reach of that river goes dry, or that creek goes dry every year. And so what they do is the tribe goes around and they scoop up baby salmon out of the pools as the pools are drying up, and they move them upstream into the headwaters. And they to places such as here, where they've built what's called beaver dam analogs, which are sort of people building structures that mimic beaver dams. And then the beavers have actually come in and built onto the starter dams that the tribe had built. So there's really this kind of collaborative work between the people in the tribe and the beavers to pond this water and to create good habitat for these fish. And it's been a really successful program. They tag a lot of these fish, and they've captured quite a few of them coming back as spawning adults several years later. And one thing I forgot to say earlier is that I'm presenting information and work that many people have told me about over the years and months that I've been working on beaver issues. And when I talked to Sarah and told her I was going to give her a presentation, she's like, "You need to say something about that. Beavers are not just a tool; that they're their own beings with their own intrinsic value, and it's not just about what they can do for us as a society, but we should honor them as just the beaver beings that they are." So in the Scott Valley, the Scott is just over the hill to the north up Highway 3. The Scott River Watershed Council has very active in beaver-related programs. Here's an example of a natural beaver dam on French Creek, where they've pounded in some posts to strengthen that dam and increase it so it doesn't wash out every winter. They do a lot of things all over the Scott Valley. But one place that they work that's particularly interesting is in the tailings. Have anyone seen the mine tailings up on Highway 3 near Callahan? It's just these like bowling ball sized boulders, right? Just piles and piles and piles. So when they started, Sugar Creek was just this little kind of a ditch just this one line of stream. And they've done a lot of things like excavating the floodplain and reconnecting existing ponds that were nearby, and really, really made this into actually excellent fish habitat in the middle of what's really a bowling ball desert. And I'm going to show a video in a moment here of a beaver that has, this is just from, I think, last week. There was a beaver that came in and is checking out their new restoration project, this new channel that they built, and I think it's giving it seal of approval. I don't know, but it's pretty rare actually to see a beaver in broad daylight. They're generally nocturnal, or maybe first thing in the morning or last thing at night. But this was the middle of the day. So now move on to Browns Creek and Canyon Creek Lakes. So this is really kind of a sad, unfortunate story. So during 2021, in the middle of a pretty severe drought, there's streams drying up all over Trinity County. On Browns Creek, there's a nice beaver dam that has a pond in it, and there's a lot of happy fish in that pond. There was a warden from California Fish and Wildlife who mistakenly thought that the landowner had built the dam in order to facilitate his water extraction. And the warden came in and tore out the dam, drained it really fast, and it was a massive fish kill. And the landowner was really mad and upset about this. And he went around and he scooped up dead fish and documented them in this photo. If you look in there, you'll see coho salmon, you'll see steelhead, you'll see lamprey, you'll see salamanders, you'll see dace. It really was not a good situation. And it really, I think, was a big mistake that I hope that the department has learned from, and I hope that we all can learn from. And it's incidents like this that make me so happy with what the department is doing now with their beaver restoration program. And the department is a big department. There's a lot of people working in it, and there's been a lot of very pro-beaver people in the department for a long time, but it's great to see the organization as a whole becoming more proactive and a positive force with regard to beaver. Probably the most famous beavers, I think, in Trinity County are the ones that went up to Canyon Creek Lakes. Has anyone heard about this or seen about this? It was back in like 2016, 2019. Yeah. So the Canyon Creek Lakes. So they undoubtedly came from the Trinity River, right? Which is a 4,000 foot climb. There's waterfalls. Probably many of you have seen those waterfalls on there. So it's, I guess like a overachieving, hyper-athletic beaver, wanted to show what they could do, and they did it. So the beavers were up there for several years. They even built a dam on the outlet of one of the creeks. So it's pretty neat. And I just heard from Carla DiGiulio that the beavers are back. She heard from a hiker. Yeah. So they just showed up in the last few days. So that little circle there is a little beaver swimming around. So it's pretty exciting. But those are not the only high elevation beavers in the Klamath Mountains. From Justin Garwood, I got this information that he found an old report of beavers in Little Duck Lake, which is over above Scott Valley, back in 1957. From Cabin Meadow Lakes in 1966. So the beavers do go up into the high elevation areas, and I think there is, substantial potential for them to establish more of a permanent presence up in the lakes and in the high meadows. There also, I think, has only happened in relatively recent years that the beavers have moved upstream of the Trinity Lake. And there's been signs found in Morris Meadows, in Union Meadows, in the lower Stewart's Fork, in East Fork Trinity River, and then James just told me that he's seen them around the Coffee Creek area as well. So here's a photo from Carla from the Union Meadows up in the Trinity Alps. And now we have our special guest speaker, Josh Smith from the Watershed Center. And I'll be back in a few minutes.
And there's plenty of other people here who could do a good job of talking about this. Carla's a total expert, has been looking for beaver for a long time, has a lot of great knowledge. But I wanted to give a few examples of things we've seen in recent years that are, I think, really interesting. 2014, 2015 was one of the worst droughts we've seen here, period. Maybe there was one in the 20s that was similarly bad, but this one was really, really bad. Hayfork Creek was completely dry downstream of the valley. It's a huge watershed, completely dry downstream of the valley, except for areas that had beaver dams. So as we were looking around to see what fish might have survived this, pretty catastrophic drought, the only places that we found fish alive were in beaver dams, and in particular areas that had springs nearby. But still, these were the few places that were able to hold enough water to keep them around. Now, I actually want to take a step back real quick and talk about like the Hayfork Creek has had, it's a nice big flat valley. It's like a mini version of the Scott Valley, right? So beaver need space to grow. Like if they can have some space where the flooding can occur and can get up and over the banks and doesn't blow their dam out every year, they do a lot better. If it comes in and their dam's blown out every season, they'll just move on. They don't seem to like that very much. The other thing they really need is a lot of food. Hayfork Valley is a good place for both those things. Tons of willow, a bit more space than some of the other places in Trinity County. We've seen the population grow in Hayfork. We kind of joke about maybe some old trappers passing away or something like that, because the population has been steadily growing and growing since I've been watching for 15, almost 20 years. I kind of threw this in just to show they are all over the place. This is way upper South Fork Trinity River. There's actually a historical report about a beaver in almost the Yola-Bullies. This is really close to the Yola-Bullies up in the upper South Fork Trinity. A beaver dam complex showed up. This was 4 or 5 dams kind of in a row. Brad Stratman was with me when we went and checked this out. And a lot of people will say that there are fish passage issues. So they build a dam, and there are times when I think they can be problems for fish. But in this case, there were spring chinook, huge spring chinook above, in between, below the dams. So they actually, even really big fish can kind of move up and around them most of the time. Juveniles like them a lot. They can kind of get in amongst the sticks and kind of do all kinds of, get around really well. Beaver dams come in all different shapes and sizes. This is a pretty unique one in Wildwood. Pretty recently, I think we were here up in the fall, Bridger and I and a few other people. The dam kind of was just straight across the river, kind of blew out through the middle, and they're opportunistic. They take advantage of what's there. So there were already a bunch of infrastructure, but some trees, some things to build off of. They kind of don't build in straight lines. They'll just use whatever is kind of available. So sometimes you get these wild shapes and sizes. Again, talking about how their population has expanded over time, and then looking at kind of how changes can occur. I don't know if you guys can see this really well. This 2004, 1 dam in this location. 2007, we're starting to get multiple channels, multiple dams. 2010, again, even more complexity, more dams, more channels. 2022, at this point, it's a super complex, multiple pools, multiple channels, multiple dams, really great fish habitat. We see there's mink in here. There's all kinds of unique critters that just love this area. The bird life is amazing. Right in the middle of town. I was just going to show a little bit of progression of like how beaver dams evolve in Hayfork anyway. So this is a pretty older photo. That's the wrong date on there. Anyway, but basically this is a dam that is maybe 1 or 2 years old, and they build the dam up in the summertime. It's really just to get water deep enough that they can survive. Winter rolls around, starts moving sediment downstream. Those dams start catching all that sediment, and so it goes from being a hole where they can swim and have depth to a lot of times it fills up to that dam level if it doesn't blow out. So there's a photo in the wintertime at decent flows of the aggradation, the sediment building up behind the dam. So here's the same place in 2013. We do creek cleanups out there. That's why we kind of go and look at a bunch of this stuff during winter months. So that's the same dam in 2013, starting to develop some willow, starting to develop some plants, grasses around it. Same place, 2019, starting to really grade. It's substantially higher elevation now because it's accumulated a bunch of sediment around it. The willows are super pronounced at this point. And 2024, where it's so hard to get through. So it's really complex, really dense, and it's accumulating sediment and building a grading. And just to be clear, so the Hayfork Creek has incised for a long time. I mean, we have a lot of different data that we can show to prove the point, but it's kind of been down cutting for a long time, and the beaver are starting to build it back up to what it used to be. And that's really important for building up groundwater table, making sure we have more and more water. All right.
All right, my microphone back on, yeah? Okay. So one of the things that California Fish and Wildlife has done as part of its beaver restoration program is they've awarded a more than, I think it's a $1.6 million grant to the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center to develop a beaver coexistence and training and support program. So if you have a problem with beaver on your land, now instead of having to call a trapper, you can call Gray Hayes at this number, and they can come help you, advise you like, oh, you could try this, you could try that, and we could come out and take a look at this. And so it's really great to see the department supporting these non-lethal management strategies. They're also partnering with the Beaver Institute, based over in Massachusetts, to develop a program called Beaver Core, which is a way, if you want to find out more about how to build these flow control devices, you can go do this training program with the Beaver Institute. And I think they have scholarships for that. So any people are interested in maybe even getting a career out of this, here's an opportunity for training. And for landowners, a way to help you with your land management. Another great opportunity for, so as members of the public, you might be wondering, well, what can you do to help beaver, right? So one way that you can do that is by, if the beavers show up on your land and they maybe start nibbling your trees or something like that, just don't freak out and try to seek the advice and expertise of someone who knows about beaver and how to deal with beaver and beaver-related issues, such as by calling this number. So one example, that over on Clam Beach, between Trinidad and Arcata, over on the coast, there used to be a nice dry path that went out to the beach from the parking lot. And the beavers showed up and they dammed the creek, and they built this really amazing wetlands pond with all this incredible bird life and wildlife, but it flooded the path to the beach, right? And so Humboldt County Parks could have called in a trapper and tried to kill the beaver. But what they did was they just elevated the walkway. They only needed to elevate it like a foot, and they just built a walkway to get through there, and it worked. The beavers were able to stay there. The people were able to get to the beach. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for coexistence and creative solutions. If you're interested in getting more beaver training, another group you should pay attention to is this California Process-Based Restoration Network, or CalPBR. They have quarterly virtual meetings where they talk about beaver restoration and how to build beaver dam analogs and things like that. And then once every year in the fall, they have a hands-on training usually out at a high Sierra or high elevation meadow in the Sierra Nevada, where you get to get your feet dirty and learn from the experts, from the people who are building these things all year long. You get to camp out with a bunch of cool people and talk about beavers and habitat restoration, and it looks like a really good time. Last year, they even were out there during the Northern Lights. So yeah, really amazing. I was not there, but you can see we all missed out by not being there. Also, I'm sure many of you are out and about, walking around the rivers and streams around here. And if you see beavers in a place where you aren't used to seeing them, some new activity maybe, especially if you're, say, upstream of Trinity Lake or up in the high elevation mountains or on the coast from Humboldt Bay south, please record your beaver sightings onto the iNaturalist. It's either a website or an app that you can download on your phone. It's really great, easy to use technology. You just kind of take a picture and then say, I think it's a beaver, and that's pretty much all you have to do. And then it'll go into this long-term database that can be used by wildlife managers and researchers, and it's a really long-term data source. So things you might look for are dams, of course, but you already know that. Chewed stumps, sticks that have been stripped of all their bark, or maybe you might even see an entrance to a bank lodge. If you want more information about what to look for beaver signs, there's a great publication on the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center's website that has more examples of what these things might look like. And if you spend enough time outside, you might see the actual real beavers in motion. This is a picture I took while I was fishing with my dad near Lewiston about 10 years ago when I first moved to Weaverville. All right, thank you.